take command. Logan Paulsen there, Craig Hoffman here, fresh off our trips to Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. And that means, Logan, it's time for a Combine recap. And instead of doing winners and losers like everyone else does, or trying to do every position group, there's plenty of pods doing that, including many that our friends do that'll do a great job. Trevor and Dame Rugler and all these folks that we talked to last week. So what I wanted to do was try to organize this in a way that's like, who actually moved the needle for themselves at the Combine? Who had a good enough, bad enough, or somewhere in the middle that we're trying to make sense of it enough Combine that it's really worth talking about what they did. And then we'll put this information to use with another mock draft, maybe as soon as later in the week. The first guy that I want to talk about is someone who's been mocked to Washington in multiple mocks, and who I think had one of the most interesting combines because he ran extremely well, but did not jump very well in terms of the other explosive stuff. And that's James Pierce, the edge out of Tennessee. Ran, I think it was a 4.47, but the vert wasn't very good. The broad jump wasn't very good. What do we do with James Pierce's combine, and what does that do in terms of his potential to fall to Washington and whether or not they'd want to take him?
Yeah, so his I got the numbers right here. So he ran a 4.50 on his first one and 4.57 on his second one. He had a 31-inch vertical, and then he had a 10.3 broad jump, but his first one was a 9.8. So just to kind of give that some context, obviously dude is incredibly explosive. Like he ran a fast 40, right? Which is really important. Sorry, I just hit my mic. But I do think like some of those jump metrics are a little bit concerning because again, you'd like to see if you run a 4.5, you'd like to see about a 35 to 39 inch broad or a vertical jump, right? You'd like to see a broad jump that's kind of in that 10.5 to 10.9 kind of range, right? And again, so there's obviously some explosiveness to him. It's just manifesting itself only in the 40, right? I'm trying to look up his 10 here. I can't find it.
156. I got it.
156, which is pretty good. Like,
yeah,
you know,
it's pretty good. It's not elite, but it's also not. It's like 1.4. If that's a 1.4 something, like now we're talking. 1.56 is still pretty darn good though.
Yeah, so like basically like 1.55 is kind of the mark you're looking for. So it's not like he's crazy off of that, but like you said, like the elite ones are 1.52, 1.49, like so obviously
and especially for an edge, a guy who like then is all of a sudden to turn it on and get top speed to make up the fact that now we're like, wait, you ran a 4.47 and you only ran a 1.56, like that's top end speed, which is great to have as like a track guy, but you're an edge player. I care about your explosiveness way more.
Yeah, and so I think the thing about this like is you got to put this in context, right? So, you know, he's 6'5 1/4, he's 245. He's got 32 3/4 inch arms, so everything kind of fits the bill. And on film, man, he's electric. He's got the juice. Is he the most refined pass rusher of all time? No, but does he kind of fit that Dan Quinn mold of guy? You know, he talked about in his press conference, he was like, "Oh, I want guys that can get to the spot, that can beat you to the spot." And that's quite frankly like how he wins. And so, get off on the field is slightly different than get off in a 40. And so what I would say there is like the really great guys, like the guy that comes to mind is like Von Miller. They probably have a great 10. They do. But the thing that makes them elite is their ability to anticipate the snap count, right? They have different tells, different things. Like I remember playing with Elvis Dumerville, who was great at this. Like he'd like watch the quarterback's fingers from under the center's butt, and different quarterbacks had different hand carriages, like when they were in the gun, and guys would like twitch their pinkies before the ball would come. So he'd get off on the twitch. And so there's that. And so whatever mythical thing he's doing on the field, James Pierce Jr. has a great get off, right? He has a great get off that executes on the field, right? And I think the numbers here support it well enough. Like, would I have liked better numbers? Sure. But I think I also marry that with the on-field drills, which, you know, sometimes the broadcast doesn't do a great job showing. And he moves like a DB. Like he just moves so effortlessly. He bends. He's got great feet. So when you kind of put the whole aggregate of the workout together in conjunction with the film, you're like, this dude's going to be, there's no question about his athleticism, I guess, at the next level. Like he's kind of answered all of those boxes with the workout, with, again, the fast 40. And the second broad jump's decent. It's not terrible. So you kind of say all that plus the film, I kind of feel like he's no longer going to be available for Washington at 29. But, you know, crazy things happen. And again, like the other important thing to note here is there's a lot of stuff that comes out in medical and comes out in the meetings that is not going to show up on my little spreadsheet here. So,
right.
You know, like that's another thing to consider.
Do you think some teams will, like, ultimately, does this workout increase the chances that he falls to 29 because some teams will have too many worries about the numbers, or does it decrease it because you think teams will take in what you did, which is an overall athleticism through the on-field workouts, et cetera?
I think I mean, for me, it decreases it, right? I kind of thought, that he was going to kind of slip down and kind of be there because his production was lacking. Is he a top flight athlete? And again, these numbers, 31-inch vertical is not great. If I'm his agent, I probably would have said, don't do it, like, because the other stuff's probably fine. But I think it kind of keeps him in that probably 25 to 15 kind of range for me, at least in my mind. And if he slipped to 29, I think that'd be, as long as the person fits with what Washington's trying to do,
Right.
I think would be great for kind of Dan Quinn's vision of elite edge rushers. And like I said, he's like he's my fifth or sixth guy, and I like him a lot. And again, so I kind of see him in that Washington range, but I do think nationally after this, he's going to get a little bit more buzz, a little bit more juice. That's what happens when you run a fast 40. I talked to a couple scouts, out and about in Indy. And one of the things they said is like, I'm going to go back and watch him tonight. So it just gets more eyes back on him. Kind of they watch more film, they watch more games, and I think when you watch his 2023 stuff, you're gonna be like, yeah, like he's a top 20 type guy in the NFL draft. Now there's 2024, which is different, but I think it's going to kind of make people say through further examination that they'd be comfortable with taking him a little bit higher.
All right, we got 10 guys to get through. Pierce is probably the most interesting because of the discrepancy, but we got 9 more guys that we're going to roll through here that we thought their combine means something, especially relative to where they could or couldn't fall to the Commanders. Next guy up, all he did was run, and that's all he needed to do. Matthew Golden goes out and runs a 4.29. This is a guy that at 5'11", 191, like not the prototypical big, receiver opposite Terry necessarily that you're looking for, but we know the Commanders needed to add juice. Absolutely a guy that if he's available at 29, you're going to take. I think after running a 4.29, probably not going to be available for Washington.
Yeah, I don't think at all. I never thought he'd be available there, quite honestly. Like
he was mocked to them, so this isn't crazy.
No,
so,
it's not crazy.
Yeah.
But in terms of I do my own thing. I watch my own stuff. I had him as the third receiver, and so that third guy usually goes anywhere between kind of 22 and, let's say 12. And I think that when you look at him, like I heard the comp of Stephon Diggs, like I got a little bit of Antonio Brown just from how he runs. He's like that smaller guy, but like hyper quick in the short area. He can run every route. He's competitive at the catch point. And the one question is like, what kind of vertical horsepower does he have? He looks fast on film, but how fast is he really? And you come out and run a 4.29. It's like, well, no more questions about that, So like, I think again, like I love his film. I think he's really talented. And I think he's a great workout guy. I think all that stuff shows up, but the 4.29 really cements it for me.
All right, so Golden probably not going to be available for the Commanders. One guy that I have seen mocked to them end of the first round, who we knew would just be probably the freak of all freaks at the Combine, is Nick Emmanwori, the safety from South Carolina. And I think Lance Erline on NFL.com says his comparison of, one-to-one player is Jeremy Chin. So obviously we for all these guys, Emmanwori, anybody else, Golden, anybody we're talking about, Pierce, we don't know what happened in the interviews. We don't know what happened the character. So like before we get enamored with Nick Emmanwori's numbers, especially because his numbers are insane, it's worth pointing out that we're doing this based off numbers, and that's kind of the point of this segment. But always remember, based off of last year, especially what we learned from the Commanders, that the character and who they are matters as much or more than any of this. So with that, let's look at Nick Emmanwori's numbers and go, oh my God. 4.38 40, 1.49 10-yard split. He jumped 43 inches vertically and then 11.6 best at the Combine broad jump. And by the way, knocked out 20 bench reps at 6'3", 220 with 32 and a quarter inch arms. So some pretty long arms for a safety, pretty big wingspan, and he still knocked out 20 bench press reps at 225. This dude athletically is a freak.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like a superhero. Like watching him run, it was like it didn't look right because it's like not like he's super technical, right? It's not like he's like a super technical sprinter. Like you can tell, like with Golden, for example, like he's run track. They've gotten the start. They like know how to do kind of the first, I forget it is like 10 steps. You're down, looking at the ground, then you kind of slowly rise up and like the transitions and all that stuff. He's not that. He's just a big old horse, that's fast and strong and crazy explosive. And it shows up on film. Like if you want to watch something fun, Go watch Nick. How do you say his last name?
I
Emmanwori.
believe it's Emmanwori.
Yeah, Emmanwori. Go watch his highlights on YouTube and watch him on his interceptions specifically, and watch him just outrun everyone for touchdowns, like everyone. And it's like he's fast, man. He tracks the ball well. He's got some good man-to-man coverage stuff on film. It's so funny. Like I was not very high on him prior to this, and I was like, man, why do I think he's terrible? And I realized that I had watched his worst game graded by PFF through the year. That was the one game I watched, was the Alabama game. And I was like, And so then everyone's like, you should watch a different game besides that one because he's better in those. So again, like
he's better than his worst performance.
Yeah,
aren't we all?
Yeah. And so, I mean, he's a freak, man. And I think the thing about him is he's like that gets me a little bit worried is like, what do you do with him? Do you play him in the post? Do you play him in line? Do you play him like kind of as a pseudo linebacker nickel player? And we've seen how guys that have a hard time with that, like the NFL specifically has a hard time finding a home for guys like that. So I think he's a true safety. I think a lot of people are going to think, oh, we can play him as like a nickel linebacker and do some different stuff with him like you can with Jeremy Chin. I'm not sure he's there yet. But again, like the testing is crazy. I think he definitely tested himself into a first round player. Definitely.
Yeah. And obviously Washington there at 29. It's the direction they could go. Now, if they re-sign Chin to a long-term deal, I don't know if it's the best use of the pick, but you can, with an athlete like that, on some level, you maybe just figure it out. Speaking of crazy athletes, next guy, Arman M'eu. This guy's there was a chance maybe going in of some bad testing, whatever. I don't know, some injuries history came out that he could fall. This dude is probably not getting out of the top 10 at this point.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have now moved him up to their top offensive lineman. Lance at NFL.com has him as his top offensive lineman now, ahead of Campbell, ahead of all the other dudes. This dude, I mean, he's 20 years old, and
that's crazy.
He has a great maturity about the way that he plays. He came in 6'4", 332, 33.5-inch arms, ran a 4.91 vertical jump 34, a 9.7 broad jump, and 31 bench press reps. Holy bejesus, Logan. Arman M'eu.
Yeah, so crazy. Like the arm length's good. The weight was crazy. For him to run that at 332 was crazy, man. Like, and then so you're like, oh, maybe he's just kind of straight line fast. It shows up a little bit on film, but then you watch him in the drills and he looks so like there's certain times like last year or 2 years ago, like where you're watching what is a first round offensive lineman and they just look different and better than everybody else. And that's how you felt watching the drill work with him. I mean, I just was like, the way he moves, how light he's on his feet, like, I don't know, he's probably a tackle now, I think for sure, based on these athletic measurements and like based on the athletic testing and the measurements. But I kind of feel like I could see some teams moving him ahead of Will Campbell because Will Campbell looked great. He ran well. He looked well in the drills, but the problem is he looks smaller, right? When you put him next to M'eu, like M'eu just has this physical presence that I think a lot of teams are going to get infatuated with. And I do think Will Campbell could play tackle, but I think he's probably a guard. And I talked to a guy, out at Prime 47. He was like, you know what? Like, I think he's a guard and I'm not drafting a guard in the top 10. And I was like, okay, and so there is that.
So it wasn't Scott McLuhan.
Yeah. No, it was not Scott McLuhan. But and I think the same conversation is true for Banks too, the guy from Texas. Like, so the fact that this is a tackle measurement guy, he is a tackle. You can definitely give him a shot there. The size, the strength, the physicality. I think you might see people flip and have him in the top 10 and move some of those other guys down the list a little bit, which is crazy because, it's been Will Campbell and Banks this entire time. But that's what this event can do when you get everybody together and see them right next to each other. You say, man, that's the one that looks like these other guys did from years past.
For sure. So he's not on the table for Washington. This guy might be, though. Josh Conerly, offensive tackle out of Oregon. First of all, he's huge. 6'5", 311, 33.5-inch arms. He also has just meat hook hands. 10 3/8 on the hand size, whatever that's worth. Ran a 5.05 40, 171 split, so pretty good for reference. M'eu ran faster 40, but was a 176, I think, 179.
Yeah, a little slow.
10-yard split, 34.5-inch vertical, only an 8.7 broad jump, which is obviously not that great. Easy for me to say, being 6'5", 311. But kind of numbers a bit all over the place in terms of some explosive traits, some it's not showing. what do you make of Josh Conerly out of the combine, and what would you think of him at 29 for Washington?
Yeah, I definitely think you see his explosiveness. Like when you watch him in the 40, when you watch him in the drills, like the 10, I think speaks to that. The vertical speaks to that. He's a little bit to be tight in his hips, and I think that shows up in the broad jump a little bit, like when you watch him do the broad jump. So I think when you watch his film, he's like just incredibly solid, you know. And I think he feels to me like one of the only guys in this class that is a true tackle, like undisputedly. And so, yeah, I think he ran like a tackle. I think he moves like a tackle. I think the athletic ceiling isn't as high as some of these other guys, like, you know, the Josh Simmons or, you know, even the M'eus, for example. But I think he would be a good, solid starting left or right tackle in the NFL. And I think when you look at his film, he's a guy that is detailed, he's passionate, he's physical. And I think he can grow into his frame a little bit, which is also very exciting. But yeah, that's kind of like my thought on him. And I think he's a guy that I just, after watching the offensive lineman, feels like, because of the position that he plays and how he tested, a really solid selection, and there's a really solid opportunity he'd be there for the Commanders at 29. I think, and that's why we're talking about him, is because like M'eu, I think, is completely out of the conversation now. Connolly feels like he might still be in that conversation, and we're gonna, you know, as we get more kind of general information about the person, the character. But that's one, if the Commanders don't make a move in free agency, that I'd say that could be their pick at 29.
For sure. Okay, that's the first 5 of our 10 guys that moved the needle at the combine. Quick break, come back. We'll get to our second 5, including a couple more offensive linemen to keep your eye on for Washington.